If you grow up a sports fan, there are certain times of the year that will never cease to be special, will never cease to bring remembrances of your childhood, remembrances of good times. And because it's sports, and because we root, and because we cheer, and because we do exactly the opposite of that when our teams lose, it brings to memory, of course, disappointments and frustrations, of course, but that goes with being a sports fan. So for many of you, I'm talking about the NCAA basketball tournament, March Madness, the Final Four. I'm talking about conference championship games in the NFL and the Super Bowl. I'm talking about opening day of the Major League Baseball season. Uh, for some of you, it's the Masters and various times. Grand Slam tennis, Grand Slam golf. We talk about the Masters, but also the U.S. Open, which way back was always my favorite golf tournament. Rivalry week. Just to pull up the matchups and look at the schedule starting on Thursday, and just to see certain names of teams next to each other, knowing that they're playing, even if the game is between two marginal, pretty bad, sometimes god-awful teams this year. They're no good this year. They're not playing for anything else, but it's for pride. It's for bragging rights. It's for a win in this hallowed series, whichever one it is. And so this is one of the aspects of college football that I love, is I can see, as we did last weekend with USC and UCLA, who should be playing this weekend, Pac-12. I don't know how you screw that up. I've heard the scheduling explanations about it, but USC, UCLA should be the final weekend of the season. But when you see certain names on the laptop or on the phone, but on the TV screen together, when you see those uniforms on the same field in the same environment of one of the two participants, it brings to mind, it brings back a certain feel, a certain vibe, a certain remembrance of games gone by. And for me, because I'm such an enormous college football fan, it's not even necessarily of the team that I love or the rivalry that hits home for me. It's all these rivalries. I have memories as I go through the schedule of all these rivalries. They all mean something to me. They all bring back the past. They're all nostalgic. They all should be protected. I went through my helmets, and it appears as though we have come to a conclusion on the helmets. I think we're done with collecting helmets, unless somebody would want to add their helmet. Any particular team helmets that you want to add, feel free. The most recent would be the North Carolina fan. I forget who it was, pardon me, but the North Carolina fan who wanted a Tar Heels helmet, and so here it is. But so I tried to match up, and I knew that this wouldn't work out too well because I only have about 15 helmets. So I wanted to see how many helmets of this weekend's matchups we could match up. There's only a measly 2. So you got Florida State up top, and we've got the game down below. I am getting to as many broadcasters, bloggers, writers as I possibly can, beat writers, this week to preview these matchups. It's a bit difficult and a little bit more tricky this week because of Thanksgiving. Let's see. Today we recorded Texas A&M, so we previewed Texas A&M LSU. And also today was, of course, we recorded with Mr. Steve Dace on Michigan Podcast talking Ohio State and Michigan. and we'll be recording on through the week for many of these matchups. Shoot, I have time already slotted to talk LSU and Alabama and Auburn and Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, Iowa. We spoke today with Greg Peterson and Corey Bratta. We had a great Nebraska Live today. And we've got the same duo ready to do it all over again, but from the Iowa side on Tuesday. So our Tuesday lineup is a special one, a bit altered this week because of the holidays. So on Tuesday, we've got a 1:15 Miami Live as the Canes play Duke. That not part of Rivalry Week, but Miami plays Duke. 1:15 Eastern Time, Miami Live. 3 o'clock Eastern Time, a special time this week for Florida State Live. 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Florida State Live. The Iowa show is at 5:30 Eastern. And then we're all going to be back here, right? We're all going to be back here at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for the unveiling of the playoff rankings. All right. I'm going to get to some comments and questions in the chat. We will open up the phone lines in just a minute. I did want to review because this means a whole lot to me. I know you can't read this. These would be, I went through and looked at the various division standings to see who was lined up to play for the conference championship in all the conferences. I know that we are hyper to 1,000 times over focused on the playoff. I understand that. The Invitational. Hopefully we'll get a playoff at some point. Right now, the Invitational. Everybody's hyper-focused and just wants to talk about the playoff, and the playoff is everything. But to me, it's, in many ways, not necessarily more important because everybody's given the playoff more importance, but it's more valid to win a conference championship. It's more valid. It's more tangible. It's objective. If I was a football coach, regardless of what school I coached in this day and age, and I was ever asked about the playoff, I would say the playoffs aren't our goal. They can't be our goal because we don't control that. The playoff is a selection. It's an invitational. I would refuse to call it a playoff. I'd call it an invitational because that's what it is. And I'd say that's not our goal. Our goal is to win the conference because we can control that. We can win the conference. We win all our games, we're going to win the conference. If we win the conference championship game, we are going to win the conference. I don't know if we're going to go to the playoff. I don't know. How can that be a goal? How can you have a goal when it's somebody else deciding whether you can reach that goal? In the Pac-12, it is quite the setup in the North Division. We've got Oregon at 6-2. They take on Oregon State 5-3, and then you also have Washington State at 5-3 involved, and Washington State beat Oregon State. So if Oregon State beats Oregon, then you've got a three-way tie. If Washington State beats Washington, then you've got a three-way tie at 6-3. And then you go into the tiebreaker from there. I'm not going to figure it out right here. Oregon wins over Oregon State. The Ducks are in the Pac-12 championship game, and they win the North. Utah's won the South already. In the Big 12, and this does have playoff/invitational ramifications, Oklahoma 7-1, Oklahoma State 7-1. They play in Bedlam. Baylor 6-2. They take on Texas Tech. Well, Baylor beat Oklahoma. Oklahoma State beat Baylor. So if Oklahoma wins Bedlam, we've got a rematch in the Big 12 championship game the next weekend. If Oklahoma State wins, that means Baylor and Oklahoma tie for second. Baylor wins the tiebreaker, and they would go to the Big 12 championship game. It would be Oklahoma State against Baylor. So 3 teams in the mix: Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Baylor. We've got the ACC Atlantic with Wake Forest controlling its own destiny. This is a beautiful thing. They're 6-1. If they beat BC, they're in the conference championship game. Clemson 6-2. They play South Carolina outside the conference. NC State's 5-2. They've got North Carolina, their traditional matchup. And so if Wake wins, they're in the title game. If Wake loses and NC State loses, then we've got a two-way tie between Wake and Clemson. Clemson beat Wake. They would go to the conference championship game. If Wake loses and NC State wins over North Carolina, then we've got a three-way tie. NC State wins the three-way tie. I believe I worked that out last week in a video. I did. The SEC's all locked up. Alabama, Georgia. The Big Ten. Wisconsin 6-2, Iowa 6-2, Minnesota and Purdue 5-3. Wisconsin and Minnesota, of course, play the game of the year in the Big Ten Western Division. And if Wisconsin wins, they're in. If Minnesota wins, then it could become convoluted. I won't go through it. Straight out championship game in the Big Ten Eastern Division, Ohio State, Michigan. And then in the group of five, we've got an American Conference Championship game that's already locked up. So these games are meaningless at the end of the year, except for the Invitational with Cincinnati. Cincinnati, Houston are in the championship game. Conference USA, you've got a Western Kentucky Marshall situation in one division. Western Kentucky 6-1, Marshall's 5-2. So I didn't look up all the schedules here. So you'll have to do some homework for me there. Western Kentucky 6-1, Marshall 5-2. The winner of that division will play Texas San Antonio, who is undefeated. In the Mountain West, Boise State, Utah State, and Air Force are all tied at 5-2. In the other division, San Diego State is 6-1, and Fresno State's 5-2. But Fresno State beat San Diego State, so if the Aztecs lose, then Fresno State would go to the conference championship game. In the MAC, Miami of Ohio and Kent State are tied at 5-2 in one division. Northern Illinois is at 6-1 with Central Michigan at 5-2 in the other division. And finally, in the Sun Belt, Louisiana is in the conference championship game. The other side, App State's 6-1. And just behind them, Coastal Carolina and Georgia State are 5-2. And again, I didn't look through all the matchups or go through the tiebreakers for those to figure all that out. So basically, the only teams that have wrapped up conference championship game appearances are Utah, Pitt, Georgia, Alabama, Cincinnati, Houston, Texas, San Antonio, Louisiana. And then next weekend, another favorite of mine, conference championship games, which will start, I believe, on Friday. The MAC usually plays on Friday night, and the Pac-12 plays on Friday. And then maybe somebody else plays. There might be another game on Friday. And then the other 7 are on Saturday. Good times, people. Good times. I appreciate everybody being here. We've got Kyle Pickett on the line. It's good to see Kyle. Kyle, I think we've missed you for quite some time, so I hope all is good. Kyle, appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for the super chat. And yes, official hate week has started. I was told today, as we recorded a Mississippi State preview, that Lane Kiffin made a comment this week about hate's a bit strong. That alumni and students should not be hating the other school. I don't know if he was doing that tongue in cheek or he was taking things too seriously. I don't know. Hate week. How many of these rivalries use the term hate week? Or has that just become generic now? I think the first time I heard it was Georgia Tech hate week. Oh boy, I'm way back. Am I going to try to catch all these comments? I think not. Let's put a Go Bucks up there and then continue on. We appreciate the comment there. Thank you so much for that. That's very nice of you, as the real MVP says as well. Make sure you like. Thank you so much for all the kind comments. I can't get to all of them, but thank you for everything here. We're going to fire up the phone lines as soon as I check out the live chat and see if anybody's got anything here. David Greenshield, good to see you. We don't give a damn about the whole state. Christopher, come on, give yourself a little bit more. Give yourself a little bit more credit than that. Mark knows 1,000 times more than I do about anything sports related. Just ask him. I think somebody's taking themselves a little too seriously during our sports chats. Maybe, maybe not. Chris is the master debater. Let's fire up the phone line so we can get the master debater on here tonight. All right. Best week of college football. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. I will not be able to watch enough college football, especially on Saturday. What is nice is that they space it out for Friday. We've got a lot of good matchups on Friday that allow us all to watch as much as possible. And yes, we will go live. We'll go live after everything's concluded on Friday as well. We'll do that on Friday. G-Dog Forever wants to get us a Georgia helmet. Sizes on these babies. This is a 3 5/8. Is that consistent? This one doesn't say. Oh, we had a oh, they look good. They look to me. See, this is the amateur eye. So when I first purchased all these are Schutt. SCHUTT, Schutt. And then we got the North Carolina helmet, and maybe I didn't specify, I don't remember. And we got a Rydell. So we've got Schutt on every other helmet except for the special North Carolina edition of the Rydell. This is 3 5/8, and I don't see a size on the other ones. Yes, I do not see a size on these. So G-Dog Forever, appreciate that. I would admit that Georgia probably should be the next one added. I think they've earned that. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. Go Michigan. More Michigan fans here. I think we've added more Michigan fans, let's say in the last year. So we appreciate that. We appreciate the Michigan fans being here. Phenomenal. All right. We will not try to get through all these comments. I appreciate everybody commenting, and we will get right to the phone lines. Let me fire them up. But let me know. Let me know in the comment section as I strike up the live stream your favorite rivalry that does not involve your team. That does not involve your team, your favorite rivalry. So welcome everyone to the Voice of College Football. Keep in mind that we've got much for you in Patreon. It's difficult for me to talk here when I'm listening to the guy on the phone at the same time. So we've got a platform on Patreon. Just search Mark Rogers TV on Patreon, and it's $5 a month. And we've got a lot of great stuff in store for you during the off season, in particular, as we are drawing close to the end of the season. Believe it or not, we're going to do a mad dash, mad rush for the next 6 to 7 weeks to get us to the college football championship game. But even during the off season, we are running full throttle all the time. Join us on Patreon, Mark Rogers TV. Search it right there. Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App are acceptable as well in regards to your contributions. The Super Chat's available, as Kyle has so generously let everyone know. The Super Chat's available. Also, again, Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. If you would like to bypass YouTube, just search Mark Rogers TV there. And what else? Amazon. Do that Christmas shopping. And when you do, we know that I should make this very clear, because I don't always do it. I'm not encouraging anyone to shop on Amazon, but I know that you already do. So when you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide in the description section of the videos, the Amazon link. Would somebody do me a huge favor and grab the Amazon link and put it in the live chat? That would be phenomenal if somebody would do that. I've got one other I'm very needy tonight. One other favor to ask. Please subscribe to the Iowa channel. If you have any desire to help us grow and build and expand, go on over to the Iowa channel and subscribe there. Get us to 1,000 subs. And of course, subscribe to any of the channels that you want to. The reason that we're promoting the Iowa channel in particular, it's the closest to 1,000 subs. And that's a key metric according to YouTube. Appreciate that. We've got the phone lines already jammed up here at the Voice of College Football. And as soon as we get things untangled, we will be ready to roll. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, can you hear me?
I got you.
Good day.
Good afternoon to you. Where are you calling from? Like the Philippines or somewhere? Good afternoon.
I don't know. Yeah, it's DeAndre. I don't know what time of day. You know, I work a lot, Mark. Yeah, that better?
It's about midnight.
Yeah, but you know, I don't keep up with time. I work so much, I don't keep up with time.
I got you. What's up?
Yeah. First off, how has the transfer portal, I don't think it's really hurt Clemson, but I think it has hurt them, and the fact that they won't use the transport portal. But I noticed something. Young man that went from Clemson to Wisconsin, at one point he was the leading rusher. I know he got hurt. Kendrick, I don't know what all he's doing with Georgia, but I know he started most of the games this year. So I wonder, would Dabo ever say, you know, especially along the offensive line, I know that they had said that they think the offensive line has improved, but I just think also the competition from Georgia and NC State has gotten weaker. Since that's why you see so much improvement. But I wonder how much will Clemson start using the transport portal in the next couple of years. I think we need it, especially along the offensive line. We've seen Michigan State make a huge jump by just going to get a couple of guys. So I think the offensive line, if Clemson's going to get better outside of DJ being more accurate needs to improve. And I think that's the only way that you're going to help him improve if you don't see any improvement the next couple of years. I don't know how you feel about it, but that's what I think, though, about Clemson's offensive line issues.
Well, the one thing that makes sense in that is that offensive linemen are typically the players that are the most difficult to develop. So if you go into the transfer portal, you're going to get players that have more reps, that are a little bit older, rather than relying simply on recruiting. So that's about the only thing that comes to mind in regards to offensive linemen and the transfer portal being more beneficial that way, possibly.
Okay. Right. Now, were you shocked about Dan Mullen getting let go?
Was I shocked?
Yeah.
No. Now, I will say that when they made the moves to let Todd Grantham and John Hevesy, the offensive line and the defensive coordinator, go, that I thought that was a statement to say, we've met with Dan Mullen. We know he needs to make changes. We've delivered our recommendations or our mandates to Mullen. And then he went out and fired two longtime assistants that go all the way back to Mississippi State. And most likely that would be the changes that were considered to be needed for 2022, and that Dan Mullen was safe once that was completed. But I did think and stated this a number of times, and our guy David Waters from Gators Breakdown made a similar statement that that Dan Mullen was coaching for his job against Stanford, Missouri, and Florida State. And so even though they made those moves, he was safe for now, but he needed to pull the team together and show something, and show that he still had the locker room and that they were fighting for him. And obviously that didn't happen. So that didn't surprise me once they lost that game at Missouri. I was actually watching the overtime, and when Missouri scored, I thought, I wonder if that's Dan Mullen's last play at Florida.
Wow. You know, I think sometimes some people like I use Chad Morrissey. They might be better coordinators than offensive better coordinators than they are head coaches. And Dan Mullen might be one of those people. I think he did pretty good at Mississippi State, but I know the standard at Mississippi State is different from the standard at Florida. What I'm about to move on to something else. I'm about to ask you. So I would listen to a couple other shows too. And do you think Florida is the third best job open right now behind LSU and Southern Cal?
I do. And I think that there could be an argument made that Florida is a better job than USC, depending on how you look at it. But certainly the reason I think it's third is because they haven't proven that they'll put in the resources to recruit at the level that they do. Everybody's putting the blame on Dan Mullen for the recruiting issues, and he is the one responsible. But as I understand it, Alabama and Georgia and LSU put like 3 times as much money into recruiting than Florida does. So the next head coach may want to be aware of that. If that's true. I've heard that a few different places.
Now, I know we couldn't talk about it the other night, but my philosophy is that on that subject is that not only that, but you also got 2 other schools where Miami, Florida, where Central Florida and South Florida players would have been second teams at schools like Florida, Florida State, and Miami. And then also you got Georgia, the 2 other schools down there taking talent from. I know people say, well, they got enough talent, but eventually you got to think it's still going to get watered down because you got Georgia, Clemson, and Alabama dipping their toes down in there too, getting people out of there. So people say, "Oh, Florida has all the talent," but you also got to think about how many schools are coming in there taking that particular talent from that area. I mean, that's what I look at too. And my last thing is I'm gonna let you go after this, but when we were talking about Clemson versus the Big Ten West, the reason why I brought that up, because I heard you talk to the other gentleman about the Pac-10 being just as good as other schools. Yes, I agree they're not. And no, I don't think the ACC is as good as the Big Ten is this year, or like the quality of football is this year. I think that the Big Ten has two good schools, Ohio State and Michigan. Ohio State is playing better than what they played in the regular year. But why I brought that up to you, the teams that gave Clemson trouble had good passing games and stuff like that. So my question would be, what school in the Big Ten West has a good enough passing game to give Clemson trouble, or the defensive line to give Clemson trouble outside of Wisconsin? And I don't think Wisconsin has a great passing game. They mostly run the ball too, if I'm not mistaken.
True. Yeah, Wisconsin doesn't like to pass the ball. They got into a lot of issues early in the season, passing too much and putting the game in the hands of their 5-star yet struggling quarterback Graham Mertz, and then they backed off on that and really went hard to the run. And there were games where they only threw the ball 7 or 8 times, a couple games when they were trying to get themselves right. And now they've opened it up more here in the last few weeks. But they can throw it effectively, but no, they're not a passing team. The best passing offense in the Big Ten Western Division by far is Purdue. It's not even close. I would
say matched up. If Purdue, from what I understand, I haven't really seen Purdue play this year. I know they were pretty good. I think we both picked them to beat Nebraska, and there was another game I think they upset somebody in that we both picked. I'm not talking about the Michigan State game, but Purdue doesn't have the defensive line or the weapons on defense to give Clemson issues. Oh, I know I said that was my last question, but when people look back at Georgia's schedule this past year, will they look at Georgia's schedule as being kind of down this year? About like a year or two, when we talk about great teams, everybody talk about how great Georgia is. I know they beat Arkansas, who's a pretty good team, but outside of that, and they beat Clemson, who's probably on the same level of Arkansas this year, but Clemson has probably more talented, but they don't play as good a team as Arkansas does. Do you think people will look back and say they played a down schedule this year?
I think it all depends on what they do in the playoffs, because nobody's going to care what their schedule was if they beat Alabama and then 2 playoff games. Their next 3 games after Georgia Tech this weekend are going to be serious. You know, they could play Alabama, Cincinnati, and Ohio State the next 3 games, something like that. And then I don't think anyone's going to care that they played. I don't think that their schedule was tough, but I don't know of a lot of schedules across the country that are that much tougher. The reason the worst teams in the SEC and the Big Ten have tougher schedules, for one reason, that usually the worst teams have the tougher schedules, is because they don't have to play themselves to lighten their schedule, and they are obviously one of the worst teams, so they have to play all the better teams, if you follow me.
Right.
Like Clemson doesn't have to play themselves.
Yeah. Right. But that's why I was asking, because I hear some other analysts and stuff, when people go back and, well, we do it because we love college football, but you compare it to what LSU played with Joe Burrow, then you go back to what Clemson played. The year with Trevor Lawrence, everybody said, well, who did they play? They still had to play Texas A&M that year. I can't remember what Texas A&M schedule ended up being. I think Texas A&M had a pretty good year, but Texas A&M that year played a crazy schedule too, where they had to play Alabama, Clemson, and Georgia that year.
Mm-hmm.
They just had to play a ridiculous LSU. So we don't know how good they really were. But, and Mark, I'll let some other people talk. I'll just ask in that particular question. I'll get over with you later. I'll be listening to the show.
Thanks, DeAndre. Appreciate the super chat, man. Have a good night.
You too.
So anybody out there that wants to question Georgia's schedule, I get it. It doesn't appear to be that difficult. But if you take Georgia and then take somebody else that you want to compare them to and how difficult their schedule is, just take their entire schedule and then reorder it from most difficult to least difficult games and size it up against somebody else's schedule. And that'll give you an idea. If you can maintain a neutral, unbiased look, depending on who you root for. If you're a Georgia fan, of course, you're going to tend to believe that their schedule's tougher. If you're a fan of somebody else that is in competition with Georgia, whether that's in the SEC or somebody from elsewhere in the country, they could match up against Georgia and you want to kind of knock them down, then you're going to perceive their schedule to be worse. But if you look at Georgia's schedule, I'm going to say the best team Georgia has played this season, and the game that they're playing this weekend is going to turn out to be the 11th or 12th toughest, we'll put that in quotes, toughest game that they play this season. So they played Georgia Tech and Clemson outside the conference. The other two were cream puffs, so you can kick those games to the curb. UAB and somebody else. Well, the game they just played this past weekend, who did they play? Shoot. Just here in the last weekend, Charleston Southern. Yes, they played Charleston Southern. So you can just forget those games. Charleston Southern, UAB, and UAB is not a bad group of 5 team. I think they're 7-4. They've won a number of conference championships in Conference USA, but that game was 56-7. So Georgia's toughest game, I'm going to say, well, the toughest game was obviously Clemson, but in terms of the best opponent, the toughest opponent they've played, I'm going to say it's a close call between Clemson and Arkansas. But right now I'm going to go Clemson 1, Arkansas 2. Probably Kentucky 3, Auburn 4, Tennessee 5. And really, those are the games that count. Missouri's not that good. Vandy, of course, South Carolina. South Carolina's playing better, though. Between Mizzou and South Carolina, they both got to bowl eligibility this past weekend, and South Carolina beat Auburn this last weekend. That was a big win for Shane Beamer, who under the radar and very quietly has put together a pretty good season at South Carolina, considering him taking over the program he did to put together 6 wins and playing Clemson this weekend. Is not a huge, massive underdog, only like 11-point underdog in that game. South Carolina, 3 wins in the SEC, going to a bowl game. Shane Beamer's done a nice job. Welcome to the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
To the man that gives college football its voice, the great Mark Rogers. Hi, and how are you, sir?
I am doing just fine, David. Saw your comment there in the chat. There's a
Yes.
melody that goes with that. I'm kind of losing it right now.
Yeah.
We don't give. I forget how it goes.
Yes. Well, you can put it to music, Mark, because it's a great song. I sing it often, and that brings us to the game I'd like to talk about this week. I'll give you one guess on that one, by the way.
The game.
I wanted to ask the game. That's right. I wanted to ask you, Mark. I listened to your weekly rendezvous with Mr. Steve Dace, every week, and I find it to be quite interesting. The 10-minute war you guys do. Do you really think that Steve Dace is going to take his kids to see Ghostbusters this weekend, or do you think that's do you find that to be strange?
Sometimes I'm getting a little bit more comfortable doing this, but I don't want to mess up his format and what he wants to ask me and talk about. But I find myself breaking in a little bit more to question him on some things, and that was one that I really wanted. I did nothing but shake my head. I tried to make it obvious that I was shaking my head when he made that statement, but I wanted to say, truly, Steve, are you telling us that you are going to a movie? What if Michigan wins this game and you will have not experienced that joy, that moment? Are you seriously going to do that? Especially when he's picking the game at 38-28.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
he predicted the game at the end of the segment at 38-28. So he thinks Michigan's got a shot.
Okay. Well, I mean, I understand wanting to spend quality time with his family, but I mean, for this is now Harbaugh's third try, at the Apple here with everything on the line. So this is now the biggest game of the Harbaugh era, I would have to say, for them. So you'd think that with it all on the line, the game's up there too. I don't know. I don't think I would be looking forward to going to the movies with this game. I know I wouldn't do it, but he's obviously in a different place. I know that he says that he's been a very hurt man over the years, and I get that. That was me. It was called the 1990s, by the way, Mark. So
I hear you.
Living through that era.
Sure.
Yeah. I did want to get into this game a little bit. I mean, the two things that I think going into this game, I must say, and maybe you got into this with Dave a little bit. I mean, the biggest thing will be obviously for us is can our offensive line hold up, and we've been really good in pass protection most of the year. And that's the big thing that gives me confidence. Now, these are the two best defensive ends we'll have faced the entire year. We didn't face Thibodeau when we played Oregon, so. I think the best defensive front we faced the entire year. I mean, the two biggest concerns is going to be pass protection and taking care of the football. As long as we do those two things, I'm still fairly confident we're going to be probably at least close to 40, if not north of 40 points in this game, because I'm just not convinced that, as we've seen the last few times we played them, their secondary can handle our receivers, especially because these are the best receivers as a group I've seen at Ohio State. Overall, is that your read? What do you think of my analysis?
If they complete this season, meaning this wide receiver core, with stellar games in this game, the Big Ten championship game, and throughout a college football playoff, hopefully 2 games, we could start to talk about this receiver core as the greatest. I'm going to speak ridiculously on one hand, but I think if you really think about continuing to play at this level, the greatest wide receiver core in the history of college football for one season. Now, obviously,
well, I've got to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, again, anyone who's looking back on that comment is going to take receivers who then fulfilled a career both on this level and at the NFL level, and it looks ridiculous because we don't know what those guys are going to become. But I'm just talking about how well they are playing this season in this offense against this competition if they continue at this rate through the remainder of the season, considering the opponents.
You know what? I tend to agree. I mean, I was trying to think of the other great groups I've seen at Ohio State. And by the way, I would make, it's interesting. You say the best receiver group. I would actually say that the last 2 national champions, and actually interesting, Alabama in 2019, that was the year they had the 4 first-round draft picks at wide receiver.
Yeah.
So, I mean, then obviously LSU in 19 with guys like Jefferson and Chase and those guys. So, it's kind of like what I've said. Ohio State is kind of built a lot very similar to the last 2 national champions, to where they're an offensive loaded team, with a defense that's getting better and playing better towards the end of the year, which is exactly what happened with LSU's and Alabama's defense the last 2 years. They had their struggles early, and then they got, better as the season went along. Do you see, the parallels there?
Sure. Now, the one condition I'll put on the defensive performance, which was a stellar defensive performance against the Michigan State team that has been producing both in the running game and the passing game. And of course, Kenneth Walker was in the Heisman race before Saturday. And I still think he'll most likely, if he can finish strong, get an invitation to New York. The only caveat I'll put on the defensive performance is the combination of Walker's sore ankle and also getting behind so quickly that took him out of the game. I thought that we may get to see if Ohio State's defense could stand up against a running attack that would push and beat on them time after time after time and lean on them in the fourth quarter. Now, we may see that similar to what Hassan Haskins did against Penn State with 31 carries. We may see that be Michigan's strategy this Saturday.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I will say this. I mean, I've kind of resided at the fact, in looking at this Ohio State defense at all three levels, first of all, that the back seven of the defense is going to be good, but not great. Certainly, I think we've both seen, back sevens of the Ohio State defense that have been much better than this one over the years. I do think that the defensive line is finally, some of those 5 stars on the defensive line are finally starting to play like 5 stars, finally. So I think that's what's also been the big reason this defense has come along, in the last few games here, and, certainly since the first of the year, or early in the year. I would say this. I do want to talk about their offense. I would say this, Mark, and I know you've talked a lot about this with Dace, now I will say this about Haskins. Could Haskins be the best running back of the Harbaugh era? Because I know they had Smith early on and Higdon and Charbonnet and these guys, but to me, he seems like easily the best back of the Harbaugh era. I don't know if that's saying a lot, but
I don't think it's saying, no disrespect to those players. They were fine players, but none of them were elite players at their position. But I do think he's the best back of the Harbaugh era.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, I do think they are a strong running team. I mean, they kind of built their offense around that early in the season. My question, because I think this game quite simply comes down to the passing game on both sides of the ball. I think the passing game for them on the offensive side of the ball and their ability to defend our passing game, obviously, on the defensive side of the ball. Just as far as their passing game goes, Mark, I mean, I heard Dace has been saying that, that he thought early if the season kind of went sideways on him that they could go to McCarthy. And I actually think, there were some plays in the game against Sparty with McCarthy that cost them that game. That fumble was a critical play in that game. I mean, where do you see McNamara in this passing game? I mean, it's gotten, I think, a little bit better since the beginning of the season, but is there any reason to believe this is any better passing game than they've come into this game, in previous years?
Oh, I think, I don't know if I made the comment to Steve or I made this somewhere else here in the last week. I think that Michigan's passing game is the best that they've had under Harbaugh. I think this passing attack is the best one they've had. I thought Shea Patterson's passing attack, I thought when he arrived at Michigan, that was going to be the best. But I think this passing attack is the best. I think it's the most efficient. I think it's the best combination of being efficient and explosive. I think the numbers would bear it out. I believe. I've not crunched the numbers, but I believe it would bear it out. And I think sometimes I watched a podcast with the college football nerds today. I had it on to listen to their take on Ohio State, Michigan. And I don't know if you've ever seen these guys, but they do a nice job of breaking down the game. I think we need to caution, though, when we look at aggregate numbers for the entire season and not realize the teams change and that the numbers that we are calculating from week one are being calculated in the same manner than more meaningful games that have just been played in the last couple of weeks against conference opponents. So I think that Michigan's overall passing numbers are nothing to write home about, but their efficiency and explosiveness, once they got it going, and I think really the beginning of that was against Wisconsin, where they put up 38 points against a tremendous defense, that I think other than the Rutgers game in Big Ten play, they have their offense has been extremely efficient and explosive.
Yeah, I do think that they've gotten better. Early in the year, they were just really pretty much built around the run, and then, you're probably right. The Wisconsin game, it did seem like they started to kind of get it going with him. The only thing I'll say, you mentioned the Patterson passing game. The one thing and I don't think a lot of this is on McNamara, because the other thing that I question about them is, because I did think, with Patterson, when we played them 2 years ago, that's probably the best group of receivers that Harbaugh had at that time. The Collins, Peoples-Jones, Tariq Black trio that he had in 19. And that was kind of the other part of their passing game that I questioned when they lost Bell early in the year is, just also how good they were at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, all those guys have turned out, either came into college football with high recruiting rankings or have shown themselves to be decent receivers. You mentioned Donovan Peoples-Jones in the NFL, at least role players, as opposed to these guys. Obviously, we're just ranking them and evaluating them based on this season pretty much, because they haven't done much before this season. This Andrell Anthony hasn't done anything before the Michigan State game, and suddenly he's a factor. So we don't have that perspective on it, but I think that, again, I haven't crunched the numbers on this. I'm looking at Cade McNamara's numbers right now at 64%, 14 TDs and 2 picks. And I know that those, from a completion percentage standpoint and a TD to pick ratio, have to be better, as good or better than any Michigan quarterback under Harbaugh.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that he's done is he's done a great job of taking care of the football. So, that you're right. That ratio is pretty solid. I mean, my overall feel, just to kind of give you my overall feelings on this one, and I'm going to get yours. Again, I think the biggest thing that gives me confidence going against their defense is the way our offensive line has pass protected this entire year. Now, I'm not saying that, their defensive ends couldn't cause problems, but, they're going to say that they're the best defensive ends we played against. But we're clearly the best offensive line they've played against, and I don't even think that's close. So that's another thing that gives me confidence going into this game, is I think we can keep Stroud upright. If we keep Stroud upright, I right now, my early feel, Mark, I'm close to where Dave is at. I'm going to go 38-24. I was leaning 42-24, but I'll give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and say 38-24. But I think the Buckeyes win this game by at least 2 touchdowns. And if they get up early by 2 scores, I just don't know if they're built to come back, especially if we get on them in the first quarter. Then I think it could be Katie bar the door.
Yeah, the one thing about Stroud that is starting to concern me, and this is very nitpicky, but it could be crucial in games in which you need a quarterback who can get away and not just get away. He's not a statue, of course. He's an athletic guy, but he really, really does not want to run the ball. Now, I can respect that to a certain degree, and I think that's a good trait, to be pass first and have that mindset, but he does everything possible to avoid running the ball. And you well know from watching as much football as you do that how many games do you watch where there's only so many guys rushing the passer and it's 53 yards across that field, and there are gaps in that pass rush. Keeping those pass rush lanes is an important concept, because you see it constantly, especially in college football, more so than the NFL, where there's a pass rush, and especially if those ends come upfield too far, there's all sorts of gaps in the defensive line to take off and run and pick up 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards. depending on the depth of the routes downfield, and he just refuses to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I was one of those Ohio State fans, and I know you'd heard, folks early in the season from some Ohio State fans. I know you were talking about this on Buckeye Talk a lot, that was thinking that he could have ran a little bit more, particularly in some short yardage and some goal line situations. And I wasn't saying a lot of design runs, but I would say, 5 to 8 carries a game is not asking, I think, for the sun, the moon, and the stars. But I think that there might be a little bit of a hesitancy because he had some health issues early in the year. But, a lot of those instances are key first downs and, possible touchdowns that could be out there. So, I would have liked to have seen a few carries mixed in here or there. I'm not saying, go back to the J.T. Barrett or Braxton Miller days. I'm just saying, at least 5 to 8 carries to kind of keep the defense honest.
Yeah. And so that's my one concern. I am pretty confident that if Ohio State plays at the same level that Michigan does, meaning if Ohio State brings its A game, even if Michigan brings its A game, or even if Ohio State brings its C game and Michigan brings its C game, that unless there is a discrepancy between, levels of play, meaning Michigan's having a great day and Ohio State's having an off day, that Ohio State's 2 scores better than Michigan.
I feel the same way. I think the other thing that obviously, equates in a talent, when a team has a talent advantage, would either be one of two things. Either a player has just an outstanding, out of this world performance by the other team, or, obviously turnovers. So that's the other factor, is if, they force a couple turnovers, maybe a strip sack, or they're able to force an errant throw by Stroud by, maybe getting some pass rush or something like that, would be the other thing that could keep it really, really tight and give them a chance. Barring that, though, I'm totally in agreement with you. I think that's why I think we're at least 2 scores better. I think it's a good game for at least 3 quarters, but I think we'll pull away in the fourth. I mean, they're a very good team. I mean, but your point is dead on, Mark. I think, after the top 3, and I think this is what you said today from the last podcast, it's kind of the top 3, and then there's the drop off. Would you still feel that way, or do you feel that this is a solid top 5 team they've got?
Yeah, so I think I put them in a collection of the top 5 to 8, 10 teams in the country, and they may be at the high end of that. They may be a top 5 team in the country, but we may still be in a situation where the number 1, 2, or 3 team, and that's what I believe Ohio State is, either 1, 2, or 3, is decidedly better than the number 5 team in the country.
I would tend to agree. I actually think we're right now at least the second best team in the country, in my view. But, time will tell, and obviously we've got to win this week. But I'll be you moving Buckeye Talk up tomorrow, Mark? Is that going to be tomorrow, by the way?
That is going to be on Wednesday at 1:30.
Oh, it's a Wednesday at 1:30.
Yes.
Okay. All right, good enough. And I'll be looking forward to your appointment with Mr. Dace. Hey, tell him not to see Ghostbusters. Push Ghostbusters back another week and enjoy the Buckeyes beating them up one more time.
All right, David. We appreciate it.
You take care of yourself, Mark.
All right. Before we take some more calls, want to certainly recognize Christ Savior 888. Thank you so much for the super chat contribution, sir. Appreciate that. Jesus is God. Thank you for that. Appreciate that so much. All right, let's get to our next call. Right here at the Voice of College Football, who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's the real MVP. How you doing?
I am doing well, and I'm sure you're gearing up for Kentucky and Louisville.
Yes, I am. Can you first, before we talk about that, can you post the number to the call-in show?
Oh, thanks for reminding me. I forget to do that all the
No
time.
problem.
Here we go. We'll find it. Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, as you know, for my rivalry, it's kind of unique and interesting because we're mainly off the national media, so it's more of a local rivalry. It's still a heated rivalry, but it's not one of the big ones. So it's still heated and still passionate. I mean, we got to play Louisville. Louisville's a favorite, which is surprising me. 2.5 point favorite. I mean, Louisville's played well the last 2 weeks. Malik Cunningham's had 11 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks against Syracuse and Duke. I mean, not great teams, but Syracuse is okay. So I think it'll be a heck of a game. I think the advantage Kentucky will have, though, is we've seen Lamar Jackson, and we know how to prepare for a mobile quarterback. Do you have any?
Well, this is my thought.
The
first thing doesn't necessarily pertain to this specific game, but the games that are played this weekend between the SEC and the ACC. This is what I would like to have. I always think of things like this and would love to have some kind of research department that would be able to dig into this and let me know. If you take out all the expected blowout games between those two conferences, and I'm just talking about this set of games, Kentucky, Louisville, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, just the Thanksgiving weekend ACC, SEC rivalry games. Take out, the last 5 or 6 years of Clemson, South Carolina, when the point spreads were 28, 35 points. Take out this week's Georgia, Georgia Tech. I'm talking about what we expect to be competitive games, okay? Like the one that you've got going this weekend with a 2.5 point spread. I would love to know what the record is between the SEC and the ACC when it's supposed to be a competitive game. Let's say less than a 10-point spread. I would like to know if the SEC wins the majority of those games.
The only thing I know is recently with Lamar Jackson, Louisville's been favored, and we've beaten them 3 out of the 4 times or 2 out of the 3 times he was there. But outside of that, I mean, it's gonna be difficult with those parameters probably recently, to be honest. I mean, a lot of these rivalries, SEC, ACC, have been pretty lopsided. And I think it's kind of hurt the sport, the cross rivalry aspect of the sport. I mean, Georgia's so much better than Georgia Tech. Florida State's been in the toilet for like 7-8 years. I know Florida's joined them this year, but normally that's been a blowout. And Clemson is so much better than South Carolina for the last 6 or 7 years, except for this year. So I'm not sure how recent the data you would get is even.
Yeah, I really am not even that concerned if it's that recent. In the last 25 years, I would be fine with those numbers because it's almost similar to the SEC playing bowl games. I take a heavy lean toward the SEC in bowl play, and they most of the time come through for me.
Right. And well, I was going to ask you about that. So if LSU and Florida both win their games, which I know is unlikely for LSU since they play Texas A&M and Florida, still a slight favorite. It's 1 point. But if they both win, the SEC would have 13 out of their 14 members in a bowl game.
I noticed that.
Does that speak? Is that some sort of record?
It would be a record. I guarantee it without even knowing what the record is. I know that the ACC had either 10 or 11. This was about 4 years ago. I believe this was 2016. I'm almost certain the ACC had 11. But 13 is crazy. Which tells you two things. Two things are happening there to get them to bowl eligibility. Number one is that there aren't many dominant teams in the conference to scarf up all those wins. So they're beating each other. There's a lot of 6 and 5 teams right now in the SEC, and there are. I actually just did my SEC power rankings. So you've got, after Georgia, Alabama, and Ole Miss, you've got 7 and 4, 8 and 3, 7 and 4, 8 and 3, 6 and 5, 6 and 5, 6 and 5, 6 and 5, 5 and 6, 5 and 6. So you've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You've got 6 teams that's almost half the league that are either 5 and 6 or 6 and 5. So everybody's beating each other. That's number one. Number two, that means they won their out of conference games.
And that speaks to the strength of the league compared to other leagues.
Yep.
Which
yes, it does.
I think would be valuable and potentially betting in both seasons.
That's what I was trying to point out to our friend Chris the other night when we were comparing the Pac-12 and the SEC.
Why would you comparing those leagues? I mean, that's a mind-boggling thing. I mean, the only teams you compare in both those leagues is Vanderbilt and Arizona because how bad both of them are. Other than that, I think the SEC would win every other match. They're just playing a different sport. But let me ask you about your rankings, Mark.
Sure.
The college football that actually makes sense. So what caused you to move Michigan ahead of Cincinnati?
So we got Oregon out of the way, which was a blessing. Not that I've got anything against Oregon. Right. I don't have anything against the Ducks. It just was just a debacle having to deal with them playing such awful football. But
well, let's be honest. They're not a good they're a top 15 football team. They're not a top 5 team, and the only reason they were in the top 5 is because they beat Ohio State.
If we see another performance though out of Oregon like we saw Saturday night, maybe they're not a top 15 team. But yeah, as of right now, I would say that they're roughly a top 15 team in the country. Yep. So Michigan, Cincinnati. Michigan lost to Michigan State in a game that was controversial. So we're finding out a little bit more of that after the game in regards to the blown calls that were confirmed by the league office. And also, I just think that Michigan sized up another opponent, not a great opponent, not even a decent opponent, but a not awful opponent, one that should gain bowl eligibility this weekend. Maryland beat them by 41 points. And we did have a nice performance by Cincinnati. I will admit that they went out and they finally took it to an opponent that probably is roughly as good as Maryland.
Right, and that's why I was interested you made the move this week.
Well, because
this is the first time in a while.
Yeah, your question makes total sense. Your question makes total sense. And I made a few moves that I thought, okay, people will question this, and that was one of them. And it was also based on going through opponents from previous weeks and trying to size up, okay, how much better has this schedule gotten than what it was before? And I just think teams like Wisconsin and Nebraska and Penn State just continue to show that they're good teams versus really nobody on Cincinnati's schedule.
I mean, I don't like using this thing because it's a horrible thing, but it works in this instance. This is a rare situation where it will work itself out because if Michigan loses this week, they'll be below Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And if they win, they'll be above Cincinnati for the rest of the season.
Sure.
So it will work itself out.
It is an elimination game for the Big Ten, or at least one of those two teams in the Big Ten. Yes.
And the final thing I've got to ask you is Houston's schedule. They get a whole lot worse because they get mighty UConn on the road. So is it possible that Houston's not even ranked when they play Cincinnati? And if so, how would that impact their playoff chances?
It should not impact their playoff chances if the committee is doing this fairly, which is, even though they only reveal to us a top 25, that they really have a running total of everybody that's relevant. Like, I believe that they should internally have a list that includes 26, 27, 28, 29. Now, they don't have to go all the way to 130, but in regards to teams that are reasonably considered, maybe a top 35, something in that range. So I would think that even if Houston's 26 right now, and even if they finish 26, because of the schedule evaluation, that the committee is looking at not ranked wins, but quality wins.
Yeah.
I might start ranking everybody in the country. I might start next year.
Yeah, make it.
Rank everybody in the country just to prove the point that there is nothing magical about 25.
Branding, and it sounds like a good number.
Yeah, it is a good number too, and I get it. And it makes sense. I get it.
I mean,
from a branding standpoint,
68.
from a marketing standpoint, and just from a management standpoint, that nobody wants to look at a list of 130 teams unless you're a nerd like me, and that would be a nightmare for me to try to manage. But if I could get some kind of computer program to help me, I would love to do that.
Yeah, we want to see where UTEP's ranked, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I
give the Miners some love.
The only thing that keeps me from changing the number either every week or picking some random number and making that my top 37. That's my rankings. I go 37 or 29 or whatever, is I'm just going to have to answer so many questions from people that it would drive me nuts. That's the only thing that keeps me from doing that.
Well, you kind of did it this week. You had a top 26. You had a tie.
I did have a top 26. I cheated. I admit. I just couldn't pull the trigger, and I'm like, I want to represent both of these teams.
If it makes you feel better, the basketball AP poll has Kentucky and Alabama tied for 10th.
Oh, I've seen all sorts of ties. We all have. And that just happens to be at the bottom. Now, as you well know from our discussions and others, that I do wrestle with, and I think anybody who doesn't wrestle with this is a knucklehead if they're putting together rankings. Trying to compare group of 5 schedules and power 5 schedules are nearly impossible, because Arkansas is 7-4, Mississippi State 7-4. How in the world do you compare that to Texas San Antonio? If they played Texas San Antonio's schedules, would they not be most likely 11-0?
Right. I was gonna make a comment about that. Is you called UAB a cupcake game, and the UTSA had to go to the final play to beat them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Georgia beat them by 50 soundly. So there's, I mean, if getting the honest fan perspective, the middle of the pack ACC team would probably beat UAB. Probably most teams in the SEC would beat UAB. They might do okay in the Pac-12 just because of how bad that conference is. But, I mean, UTSA, they're a nice story. But what will probably happen is they'll go 12 or 13-0. They'll either get paired against a decent group of 5 school like NC State or somebody like that, and they'll lose by 14 points.
Yeah, I could see it.
That's why we need fair scheduling. Louisiana
right now is probably just as good, if not better, than Texas San Antonio, but they scheduled Texas. Otherwise, they'd be undefeated. If they had Texas San Antonio schedule, they'd be undefeated, except for they scheduled Texas, who's staring at a 4-8 season right now, and beat Louisiana by 20 points.
Right. And it wasn't close the entire game either. It's not a fluke.
No.
20 points. So, yeah, you better scheduling across the country. And how do we do that, Mark?
Well, we take the scheduling out of the hands of the schools. That's what we do.
Right.
Yes.
I thought you were going to say expand the playoffs.
Well, expand the playoffs, sure. We do expand the playoffs and make it a playoff system, not an invitational.
Well, Mark, there's a lot of great rivalry games for this week. So if I wanted to know where I could get some picks for betting purposes, where would I go to?
My master promoter here, the real MVP, right there on Patreon. You get my picks, all the top 25 games. You get a 12-pack from our 20 media members. Yes, right there on Patreon. Just search Mark Rogers TV.
Yeah. And don't you get an under the radar pick of the week as well? For
We've
people
got,
who
yes.
might be overlooking a game.
We got our guy Steve Merrill on Pro Sports Info and Wager Talk. He gives his under the radar selection of the week, which I'm trying to think. I'm going to have to add those up to see what he did. I don't keep track of those week to week. Trying to think what he had for us last week. But anyway, yes, we deliver those each week.
Good talking to you, Mark.
All right, man. Thanks for the call. You have a good night.
Yep. See you tomorrow at 7.
Absolutely. That's another plug right there. 7 o'clock Eastern time, Tuesday night, watch party, college football playoff reveal. Welcome to the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, this is Sean.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, how's it going? Hey, so many things I could talk about. Try to keep this fairly concise. I was wondering, with a win over Auburn this weekend, do you think Alabama has basically punched its ticket to the playoff? Like, are they in almost no matter what happens?
I think that, again, we're second guessing or guessing what's going through the minds of the committee. I think that it told us a lot when they were number 2 in the first rankings. And that we can clearly see that if they maintain the number 2 position in the rankings, especially if they're able to do that after a somewhat lackluster performance against Arkansas, while Ohio State completely wiped Michigan State off the map, that realistically, if you're not trying to select playoffs, if you're just thinking about what makes sense, if you're the number 2 team in the country and you play the consensus number 1 team in the country and you play them down to the wire, play them well, it may not have to go down to the last play of the game.
Forget about even that. Forget about that. Say it's like 38-14. I mean, Georgia's beating everyone like a drum this year. It's pretty hard to make the argument that because they lost a game that in that situation, even I think it would be pretty hard logically to take them out of the equation.
How about Clemson? Did they lose 38-14?
That was the first game of the year. Georgia's quarterback now wasn't their quarterback then.
Yeah, a lot of people think the quarterback then was better than the quarterback now.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely got higher accolades and all that stuff. But we've seen Georgia. I mean, Clemson's not even remotely part of the discussion. So,
well, I know, but they just. They played Georgia except for one mistake made by the quarterback, Uiagalelei, who made a horrible decision, didn't see the DB break on the ball, throws a pick six. Game's 3-3. It's a 10-3 game. It's a 1-score game. And I would argue that Clemson just played its best game of the season this past weekend, and they are beat up. They are one beat up football team. So I'm just not. I'm sold that Georgia's the best football team in the country, but I don't think we give Alabama a pass into the playoffs for losing a championship game by 24 points, it being their second loss. I would think that would be completely ridiculous.
But I mean, like, it would be pretty. I mean,
Georgia's not playing anybody else though that's supposed to be a playoff team. They're beating everybody by those kind of scores that are like 7-5 teams.
Yeah, but I mean, there are 7-5 teams in the toughest conference in the country.
Yeah, but they're not 7-5 teams. Yeah, but they're not 7-5 teams vying for playoff spots. So if Georgia beats Alabama 38-14, this is not showing me that Alabama deserves or has earned a playoff spot as a team that's not won a conference championship, that has lost a second game, and they got destroyed by 24 points. That, to me, does not speak of a playoff resume.
That's fair enough in the abstract, but when you compare them against the real competition, does it actually like make any sense to say? I mean, even remove Cincinnati from the conversation. Notre Dame will probably finish 11-1. Their best win will be against a Wisconsin team that at the time was completely dysfunctional on offense, completely anemic. Wisconsin's a much better team today now, and they're not even that great now. So, I mean, their best win will be over Wisconsin, maybe a decent win over a Purdue team, and a whole bunch of just a collection of mediocre ACC and Pac-12 victories. I mean, can you really put that? And I mean, and some of them were some very razor thin wins against some very marginal competition, Toledo and Virginia Tech. You know.
Well, if we are holding the playoff, and I'm not disagreeing with you entirely. It's a completely different approach and different tack to the playoff. If you want to take it in your direction, then in 2019, I sat right in this seat, and after the conference championship games, it was very clear cut. It's the only playoff year, in my opinion, that has been clear cut. LSU, Ohio State, Clemson were undefeated. Oklahoma was the only conference champion with one loss. Put them in. But somebody at some point asked me the question, are those the four best teams in the country? And I said, no, they're not. I said, we got three of the best teams in the country. But I said, Alabama's the other best team in the country, not Oklahoma. So do we just say, you know what? You won a conference. You only have one loss, but we're going to take this other team that lost 2 games, didn't even get to a conference championship game, and that's what we're going to do, because Mark says that they're better than you. They only lost to LSU by 1 score, and they're not going to go to the playoff and be down by 5 touchdowns at halftime. You know, we could keep doing this. In 2015, I would have said, you know what? I know Michigan State won the Big Ten, but they lost to a 5-7 Nebraska team. They squeaked by a miracle like 3 different times that season. Ohio State's way better than them. I don't care that they lost to them. They're an NFL team. They should go to the playoff. We could do that every year. I don't know who would do it. But somebody, if we put them in charge and just said, select the most talented teams and put them in the playoff.
I mean, but the resume, try to say this, it's not like we're comparing like anything close to similar resumes when we're talking about like some of the Oklahoma State or Notre Dame. None of them ever have to play a Georgia. They don't see a Georgia the entire season. And, you know, they both have one loss against, I mean, depending on how you do Cincinnati, Iowa State, I mean, those are not, those aren't.
Think about what you're doing, though.
More.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but think about what you're doing. You're basically saying Alabama just lost to Georgia by 24 points, but we're going to put them in the playoffs so that they can lose again to Georgia by 24 points, rather than giving somebody else an opportunity that hasn't played Georgia and may lose by 24 points. They may lose by 4 points. They could lose by 60 points. We don't know. But we're going to deny them an opportunity. What else are they supposed to do? They play in a different conference and play a different schedule. What are they supposed to do? Are we going to take the 2 best teams in the Big Ten?
Alabama to that 3 spot.
Are we going to take the 2 best teams in the Big Ten and the 2 best teams in the SEC and make that the playoff almost every year? Unless Clemson's really good, we could shut down the playoff to 2 conferences in Clemson, and we could make that the playoff every year. And I'm not debating you. I'm saying, is that what we want to do in college football?
Well, I mean,
that's where the teams are.
That's
where the teams are.
Sometimes the alternative is you're just going to have really bad semifinal matchups. Like I think the 1 versus 4 semifinal matchup. I mean, let's just assume the top 3 are what they are going to be. It's chalk the rest of the way. Whoever falls into that 4 spot is going to be at least an 18, 19-point dog against Georgia. And I'll be surprised if they cover, to be honest with you. I mean, you set up – I mean, if you set up sometimes matches just like that, just in the sake of valuing conference championships, not looking at the actual resume, not at, of what the teams have done. I mean, Alabama beat Ole Miss is a top 10 team. Alabama, I think, just scored another touchdown on Ole Miss.
Yeah, they
won that game by like 50 something.
Alabama's had two impressive performances this year. We're not talking about an Alabama team that's running roughshod over everyone. They needed some help to beat what's turned out to be a pretty bad Florida team. They barely beat LSU. They, have not looked good a number of times throughout the season. They lost to Texas A&M, of course. And they've had two impressive wins, Mississippi State and Ole Miss. They've not been overwhelming. Are they one of the four best teams in the country? Yeah, I believe that they are too. But are we going to shut down the sport? Basically, you're proposing we shut down the sport and just say the SEC is going to get 2 or 3 spots, and the other one's going to go to Ohio State and maybe a second Big Ten team, and we'll see how good Clemson is this year. And that's basically the sport. That's going to be it. And
I think that's a bit of a straw man from what I was saying there, but I think we should value the strength of competition that these teams are going up against. I mean, Alabama's loss this year is to A&M, right? Yes. I don't think Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, from what I can see watching these teams, they haven't played a team even all that close to Texas A&M.
So
Baylor does not have anywhere close to the athletes that A&M has.
Do you believe Colorado would be competitive with Alabama in a football game?
But that's a singular outlier data point. A&M did win that game.
I can keep bringing up. I can bring up other games. No. You're making an excuse. You're linking games and making those statements.
You are overvaluing single moments, single data points, though. I would say
Colorado played Texas A&M, and
that is an absolutely
they probably should have won the game.
Horrendous performance.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I can make all sorts of excuses for other teams too.
All right. Okay. Well, my question actually initially wasn't even whether they should. Do you think they absolutely are going to get in?
I think that if Alabama plays a competitive, I believe that most likely if Alabama plays a competitive game against Georgia, they'll be in the playoff with 2 losses. I don't think 38-14 is going to get them there.
And I don't know. It's like a coin in that scenario. It's like a coin flip in my head whether they would just put them in or not. But
if 38-14 gets Alabama, if 38-14 gets Alabama to the playoffs, well, it's not a playoff anyway. It's an invitational. If 38-14 gets Alabama to the invitational, then the sports probably cross the line into a joke because the regular season doesn't mean anything. We are basing it on recruiting rankings and the best rosters. And I'm not saying they're not. Again, I would say they're one of the 4 best teams, but we might as well shut the sport down and have like 8 teams play. It would destroy the sport. Like why would the Big 12 even participate? Why would they say, why are we even playing?
Well, I mean, they played for hundreds. They played for like 130 years with no playoff. Well, they played for
exactly. Well, that's fine. We could go back to no playoff, but we have a playoff now, so the playoff needs to be legitimate. And even though it's not completely legitimate now, because 13 teams determine who makes it, they at least have some semblance of reason. Even though I don't always agree with them, they are reasonable people that try to make the best decision possible.
Fair enough. And so I mean, conventional wisdom seems to be that Cincinnati kind of controls their own destiny. Do you think that's entirely accurate, or do you think maybe one of the Big 12 schools, Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, could pass them with 2 more quality wins, 1 loss?
I believe that the Big 12 champion, unless it's Baylor, the other 2 will pass Cincinnati with 2 quality wins. I think these, to your point, the level of competition is not even close.
Mm-hmm.
I would vote for a Big 12 1-loss champion over Cincinnati.
Yeah, fair enough. Does the Tulsa data point? I mean, they both struggled against Tulsa, right there. It's interesting how these little things can probably do enter into the minds of the committee, because Oklahoma State was losing to Tulsa in the 4th quarter. Cincinnati kind of had to hang on against them. I mean, can Cincinnati use that as an argument and say, hey, we're...
Yeah. If we want to be fair, Ohio State only had a touchdown lead against Tulsa in the 4th quarter.
Yeah. Tulsa is basically like a number 12 or 13 team in the country now, right?
Yeah, based on those 3
darn good football
performances.
team. Darn good football team that's won like 3 games, 2 or 3 games this year.
Yeah.
And that's so you. I mean, so you think that's how you would vote, and it's kind of hard to project what the committee would think of that. Is that what I'm getting?
Well, I think the committee has shown us how that they've operated in the past. Now the members have switched out and changed a few each year, but they haven't yet to award a undefeated group of 5 team a playoff spot. And there's been 3 over a 1-loss conference champion.
Yeah. 3 there.
Now, none of those other 3 defeated a team the caliber of Notre Dame, but I just hate that Cincinnati's entire argument rests on 1 game.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of it, let's be honest, is kind of momentum that they carried over from last season. They've been sort of
Oh, you're completely right.
The group of 5,
absolutely,
Cinderella the entire season.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is where perception comes into play, because if Houston played, or take some completely just off the wall team, Utah State, if they played the exact same schedule Cincinnati did and did what Cincinnati's doing, and we're struggling winning against Navy and Tulsa, we'd be like, wow, look at this Utah State team. They're still undefeated. That's kind of cute. And we'll get them and maybe get them a New Year's 6, or maybe they'll just play in the Liberty Bowl or something, but it's kind of cute and nice, just like Texas San Antonio right now. But and then if they had a matchup against Notre Dame, but yeah, Cincinnati's gained this status, and they've been excused for all these close losses because they came into the season as a respected football team. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and I am a Cincinnati fan. My grandfather played football at Cincinnati.
Very nice.
Followed my whole life. And yeah. So, I mean, personally, I'm relatively indifferent to whether they get in or not. I mean, maybe not indifferent. I mean, kind of lean more towards almost not wanting them to get in, because I think, and this might be just terrible fandom in me. I just feel like they have absolutely no shot whatsoever of winning the title. They can maybe, I mean, like, just once in a blue moon, just pull something out of their hat and pull off a fluky victory against the Georgia. I think that could happen, like a 1 or 2% chance of that happening. That's not going to happen twice. And there's a much greater likelihood that they will just go there and get bludgeoned, and that will sort of ruin that will, if they go there and they lose 56-10, that will rest in the minds of the playoff committee forever.
Mm-hmm.
and ever. I mean, they'll be so reluctant, I think, to put a group of 5 team in the future. And before the playoffs came around, some of those Boise State and TCU teams, probably had legitimate, playoff credentials. Like they probably had legitimate playoff teams, the teams that belonged in the top 4 or 5. And we'll have some of those in the future. Maybe UCF had that kind of team, 3 years ago. I'm not even saying Cincinnati doesn't have that kind of team. I have so much respect for this Georgia team. I think they're so good. They're so balanced. They're so complete. Defensively, they're just like something I haven't seen since like the early 2000s Miami teams. And I think Ohio State's similar when they're cooking. They're pretty much unstoppable. I think that point spread against Michigan this week is the most ridiculous one I've seen all year. I don't know who in their right mind thinks that's going to be a single digit game. I mean, I think you're high if you really think that that's going to be a really close competitive game. But I don't know. Like it's almost like let Oklahoma State go there and just get there. The Big 12 is used to it. The Big 12 gets into the playoffs every year or every other year and just gets blown out regardless anyway. So whatever. That's not going to change anything. That make sense?
Yeah. I'm arguing with you, but I'm not necessarily, as I stated a couple times, disagreeing with you. I'm just letting you know that it's not good for the sport, and it doesn't validate the competition on the field and the results. So I don't know what we would do with the sport if we're just going to select the best teams based on who we think is going to win games.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a difficult thing to do it in this sport too, because they have, schedules are so disparate and stuff. You end up like pointing out, like finding odd data points, like how did each team perform against Tulsa, because you have nothing else really to compare them on. So it's a weird, it is a very bizarre thing. I mean, like, let me tell you something. Like, ask you this: in all those spots where you thought maybe a team that wasn't one of the top 4 got into the playoffs in the playoff era, every single time they've made it. Have any one of them surprised you at all? Their performance, like they've pretty much all just gotten drilled.
Yes.
When they were kind of perceived as posers, they kind of validated it every time. I can't think of one that's even remotely. I think of Notre Dame a few years back.
Yeah.
When I think they were 12-0 against
but certainly, the team that played Clemson in particular, the team against Alabama was just because of the style of play, they were a little bit more competitive. But the team that played Clemson,
well, they were a better team. They were a better team. Last year's team was a better Notre Dame team than the one that made it like 2 years before then. And but I'm not including them as posers. I think they were a legit team. But like Washington.
Well, you know what I would say about that Washington team, that game was 17-7 in the fourth quarter, and it was they didn't get embarrassed by Alabama. Their defense was certainly.
It was the most boring football game. It was one of the most boring football games I've ever watched in my life. It was
Alabama certainly couldn't do much against Washington's defense. I thought Washington's defense played an extremely strong game.
Yeah, they played well. They certain. Yeah, I mean, when did that? I don't even remember what the final ended up being, like 31-7 or something like that.
It was 24-7. Yep.
24-7. Okay, so. Yeah, but I mean, that was also another one. I mean, I wasn't surprised that Washington did have a pretty good defense, and Alabama was a little more conservative offensively than they have been now. So I wasn't surprised at all by how the game played out. But I also said Washington had 0% chance of winning this game, like almost none.
Yeah,
and it felt that way the entire time I watched it. And like I said, it was one of the 5 most unwatchable football games I've ever seen in my life. It was just trap. It was just nothing. It was a whole.
You must not be watching too much football if that was one of the 5 most unwatchable football games you've ever seen in your life. Wow.
I mean, nothing happened in that game that I hardly remember anything in that game of any note at all. I watched that whole game from beginning to end, but my point standing. I mean, yeah, Oklahoma a few years back too, like when they played
sure, the LSU game.
And when they played Bama.
Yep. Well, I'm going to move on. We've got a lot a lot of calls.
Okay, thank you
here,
so much.
But I
appreciate the way too much time, Mark.
Well, I appreciate the call.
It. Have a great one.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right, let's keep it moving here at the Voice of College Football. I want to check out this super chat contribution coming in from Christ Savior 888. Thank you so much for that. Asking Mark, if it's windy and rainy, do you favor Michigan? Okay. It would have to be a typhoon for me to favor Michigan first and foremost. Windy and rainy. So Ohio State can certainly run the ball. Master Teague, that offensive line. And when I say Master Teague, I'm talking that maybe he gets some more carries in that type of conditions and takes a few carries away from Travion Henderson. It's obviously Henderson's deal. Yeah, that's going to favor Michigan more. I'm not going to favor Michigan under those conditions, but I'm going to favor them more. Yes, I'm not. The rain, we saw a lot of rain around college football this last weekend. It didn't affect it. It depends the severity of the rain. There is a point, I think, in a passing game with some rain, a little bit of rain in the air that actually favors the passing game. If they can still control the football, the quarterback, and the receivers get those DBs backpedaling out in space, especially on an artificial surface that plays itself to still being able to cut fairly well when you know where you're going, that could favor the passing game if it's minimal. Now, obviously, if the ball's waterlogged and the quarterbacks can't control the ball, and the wind more so than the rain, is a enemy of the passing game. So yeah, that favors Michigan. Yes, Hassan Haskins, if he carries the ball, if I could, besides turnovers, if you could show me, and the turnover line from the Ohio State Michigan game may show us nothing because it may be 1-0. But if you would show me any statistic from the game, I would want to see Hassan Haskins' numbers. So if he's got a 16 carry game for 56 yards, then I'm going to tell you Michigan just got slaughtered, most likely. Or they lost. They lost a decided game. Versus if he goes 32 carries for $178, we could have a barn burner. All right. Again, I appreciate everybody being here. Let's take these last 2 phone calls, these last 3 phone calls. So if you're not one of these 3, please, we will wait for tomorrow night. We will talk to you. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hi, Mark. This is Dennis.
Hey, man. How's it going?
It's going all right. I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Hey, so Michigan fan here. Now, I'm a little shocked at the talk of the spread. I know it's close, probably a little close on the Vegas line, but a lot of the chat has been talking about, 14, 21-point favorites for Ohio State. Do you really think that Ohio State has that capability? I mean, offensively, Ohio State looked great last week, but Michigan didn't look like a slump either. And McNamara was playing phenomenally against an Ohio State defense that's actually been struggling a little bit and still had some of the same struggles. Now, Michigan State was not able to capitalize on that. Kenneth Walker was out. And we can look at the Michigan State game as like a predecessor to that. But we're talking about a Michigan State team that's going to play their best game against Michigan every year.
Well, I expected to see a point spread that was more in the 13 or 14 range is what well, I shouldn't say that. For some reason, the 8 hit me as a little bit low, although I was on our Michigan show last week and we were talking point spreads and people are asking me, and I actually nailed it because I said I think it's going to be an 8-point spread. But for some reason, then once I saw the 8 after what Ohio State did to Michigan State, I don't. I am good at, if you give me a matchup, I can usually go through the matchups, and before I look at the point spreads, I can usually come within a point or two of every point spread. But I do not pretend to be any kind of an expert on what Vegas values and how they determine the point spread. I can just by feel get within a point most of the time. But at the same time, I know that it's not just strictly, okay, these teams looked like this last week and the last couple weeks. Clemson's a prime example of that. They carried a huge differential versus their opponents for most of the season until recently. I think Vegas very much has a set line on certain teams, and Ohio State's one of those teams that they really value as being, great. Just look at the 2-point spreads the last 2 weeks that seemed crazy. 21 points against Purdue and 19 points against Michigan State, and Ohio State blew both of them away. And those looked like crazy point spreads to me.
Yeah.
But this game is on the road.
I'm not. It is, and that matters a little bit. Now, we know Ohio State has had Michigan numbers for better part of 2 decades. But it does feel different this year, especially as a Michigan fan. Now, look, I'm kind of in the Steve Dace pool where I'm a little self-deprecating Michigan fan where I don't really look at the Ohio State game. I mean, granted, the season is based on this next game. I don't care about the Big Ten championship. I don't care about playoff bids. I just care about beating Ohio State. And I'm not saying it's going to happen. I think that Michigan has its problems. I think Ohio State's worked theirs out very well. But I just look at other games, right? So I can't look at the Michigan State-Michigan game and say, okay, that's representative of how Michigan is going to play Ohio State. Because, again, Michigan State's going to play their best ball. It doesn't matter how bad they are. It doesn't matter what's going on. But if we look at Penn State, we look at Nebraska, right? So Michigan had them 4 or 5 points in each of those games where Ohio State had both teams by 9. That makes a little more sense to me when you talk about, an 8-point spread. And what, again, I think Michigan can win this game. I think if Michigan gets to play their game and they stay close early and they get to run the ball and control the ball, I think that Michigan can win this game. I also think that Ohio State can put 60 on them and Michigan walk away with 14. I think that's possible too, because I've seen it. I just don't know, and I'm a little blown away about everybody's just expecting 14, 21-point favorites for Ohio State here.
Yeah, I will go back to 2018, and the one difference here is that Don Brown was running the Michigan defense at the time, and now we've got Mike McDonald, and I'm willing to give him a shot at trying to figure out how to slow down Ohio State's passing attack. Because obviously Don Brown was a disaster the last 2 opportunities. I'm not going to say for the entire stay there at Michigan, but for the last 2 games in 2018 and 19. But that, because they play in the same division, as you say, we're looking at 2 teams that play 5 of the same opponents in division, and then usually an overlap game or 2 in the other division. This year it's Nebraska, so 6 games. And in 2018, going into the game, Michigan had outperformed Ohio State against all those teams. Everybody.
All the teams.
Yes.
Everybody.
There might have been 1 or 2 that were somewhat comparable.
But
I
remember.
Yeah. Michigan killed Nebraska 56-10. Ohio State struggled, beat them by 1 score, 5 points at home. On and on. They needed that dropped pass, a bad pass in the end zone against Maryland the week before, or Ohio State wouldn't have had an opportunity. The game would have been meaningless toward the Big Ten championship, and Michigan would have walked in as the Big Ten champion already, or the East champion, before they even played the game. But Ohio State lucked out and won 52-51 against Maryland, and Michigan killed Maryland, and on down the line, all the games.
All
of them. Michigan State,
I do remember.
Yeah, that was a year. Even though the score wasn't anything crazy, Michigan, I believe, beat Michigan State 21-7, but they held them to less than 100 yards of total offense. Michigan State almost got a pick six that accounted for their score. And Ohio State, they beat them like 26-16, but it was like this really ugly game that they punted 50 times back and forth, and Ohio State just basically just drove them into the ground finally in the fourth quarter, where they kept punting inside the 5-yard line. And finally, Michigan State made a bunch of mistakes inside their own 5-yard line, and Ohio State just got gifted some points and they pulled away. But it was like a 3-point game in the fourth quarter. So again, Michigan just outplayed them against 6 common opponents. All right. And then we know what happened in the game. I was going to do a similar comparison.
And I remember saying the exact same thing.
Yeah, I was going to do a similar comparison video, not just looking at scores, but looking at performance, passing game, running game, etc., offense and defense for both teams against the common opponents this year. But I think it's been, it's against the quality opponents, even though Ohio State beat Nebraska by 9, it just happened to be a 9-point game. They had to kick a field goal with 90 seconds left in the game to put it away. It was a 23-17 game, a 1-score game with Nebraska about to get the football with a chance to win. So they roughly played the same game at Nebraska that Michigan did. The game against, what was the other game you mentioned that was similar? There may not be another one. Well, I guess maybe Maryland.
Penn State was 9. Penn State was 9, where Michigan. But again, that's what I was getting at. Is like if you look at the spreads again, and again, I exclude Michigan State because when Michigan State plays Michigan, they play their best ball. I mean, every year. But that's a toss up of who's going to win that game. Arguably it's a bigger rivalry. I grew up in East Lansing, so like. I got a lot of hate as a Michigan fan being in that area, but arguably Michigan State's going to play their best ball, especially in the last decade or so.
That is the outlier, though. The Michigan State performance is the outlier, because I don't discount what you're telling me about the rivalry and how hard Michigan State plays, but those are intangibles. The tangibles are that they both played the same team, and Michigan lost, albeit with probably some questionable, if not just blatantly bad calls. So maybe they should have won the game.
Calls, yeah.
So
say
toss-up game for Michigan State versus Ohio State. It's hard to overstate how badly they killed them. To play a team that's practically in the top 5 in the country and be up 49-0 at halftime. That is just just an annihilation.
And the only other similar game this season was the Rutgers game for Ohio State and Michigan, right? So Maryland 66-17, Ohio State.
Yeah.
And then you have, Maryland 59-18.
Yeah.
But the other difference is Rutgers, right? 20-13.
Yep.
And that game was close the entire time. It felt rough. Where you have 52-13 the week after. So you could, fans like myself will argue that, it's probably Rutgers was feeling a little bit of a hangover after a close game, trying to get that 5th win. So, but yeah, no, I just wondered your thoughts on that. And then obviously I'm gonna ask the Cincinnati question again, because again, I agree with you. Like the Group of 5 conference, like how do you put them in even over a 2-loss Ohio State team that's playing really well, that's not going to get to go to the Big Ten championship? Like, how do you put them over? Let's say Ohio State loses this Michigan game, which, again, we're hoping for the best here, or I am anyways. But how would you put Cincinnati and over Ohio State as a 2-loss team that's playing phenomenal ball right now in a really tight game where Michigan gets to run their game and ends up losing by, let's say, 3 to 12 points.
It's the same issue, although it's more important in the scenario that you play out, because we're talking about playoffs versus just ranking teams, 1 through 25. But it's the same difficulty anybody has, that I think that at least I have. And if anybody's really paying attention to what's going on and trying to be fair and justify these rankings, that you have ranking any group of 5 teams. I think the AP poll and the coaches poll, and to a certain extent, I'll admit, if I throw in a group of 5 in my rankings, it's kind of like, I guess, like Texas San Antonio. At what point did they deserve to be ranked for beating another like number 104 team in the country by 6 points or 12 points? When did they magically show that they were one of the 25 best teams in the country, that suddenly they get ranked just because they're 7-0 and last week they were 6-0? Like, at no point is Texas San Antonio showing us that they're anywhere close to being one of the 25 best teams in the country. But at some point, everybody just feels like, we, throw them a bone. They deserve it. They're undefeated. Let's throw them in there somewhere. 18, and it's just kind of this random, just kind of throw them in the middle of everyone else, that you can actually compare the records and the results and the opponents in the competition. But the Texas San Antonios and the other group of 5s are just kind of tossed in there.
Yeah, it's an interesting season this year. It's been a lot of fun. I've definitely enjoyed your shows, and I try to hit all your channels, not just the Michigan and not just yours, but I definitely, the Iowa, when they were lit, like when Iowa was going off, that was really exciting. I was really excited. I thought at Penn State, last time I talked to you was actually after that Iowa Penn State game, but I think that's when we kind of knew Iowa probably wasn't it. I mean, they had their offensive struggles.
Mm-hmm.
It is nice to see Wisconsin, and Wisconsin will probably go on to win the Big Ten West and then get dominated in whoever they play. Ideally Michigan, but for you, ideally Ohio State. But it doesn't matter. They're probably going to get dominated again. And it's just part of the game. But that's the other thing, too. Should we do away with some of this division stuff to get the 2 best teams in, especially when you have such a differential?
We've gotten to a place with these divisions in the Big Ten where if you take the entire division, I don't think there's much separation. Actually, the West is very balanced and it's very strong top to almost bottom, where the Big Ten East is very top heavy. Michigan State's made it a little bit better this year, being better, but it's been 3 schools. But obviously that balance doesn't matter. All it matters is who's going to make the championship game and how good are they. And so I don't know if that's an Ohio State thing, or if that's just, well, whoever emerges from the East is going to beat the Western Division winner upside the head. So we need to do something about this. Because if you take all the scores, there's not much disparity between the 2 divisions, because again, the West is balanced, but the East is awful at the bottom. And so the West competes overall through the course of the season, but the best team doesn't compete with. And right now, I don't know whether I'm supposed to say Ohio State or just whoever wins the East, because maybe maybe if Michigan emerges this year, it's going to be a decent game. Or maybe next year, if it's Michigan State and Minnesota, it'll be a decent game.
Yeah, I just have a hard time with the West. I mean, again, just only because we've seen some of those games. Michigan dominated Wisconsin, and yes, it was early in the season, and Wisconsin was still working themselves out. They were 1-3 at the time, but I mean, it was an absolute dominating performance by Michigan. And then
it was
with
in the second half. It was.
Yeah,
they didn't come out and they weren't up 21-0 in the first quarter. That was a 3-point game at halftime.
No.
Yeah, it took a while.
It was.
But the two most recent times,
you're
or
right.
really ever since it's been the East and the West, the two times that Ohio State did not advance to the Big Ten championship game, the game was really good. Michigan State, Iowa went down to the wire. Penn State and Wisconsin was a really good game. So it may just be an Ohio State problem.
Well, Mark, I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
and I love
thanks for
what
the
you
call.
do, man. Keep it up.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Have a good one.
Have a good night.
All right. Two more on the line. Let's hit these right here at the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line? We're still cycling, trying to get them on. And I hesitate taking the other call because I've done this before, and then I got two people on the line at the same time. So we are just cycling, waiting for this call to pick up. Okay. I'm going to wait for a few seconds, and I apologize to whomever's on the line, but the call's not picking up. In the meantime, who else is in the chat here? So I will let everyone know that Tuesday, big day here at the Voice of College Football. Shoot, I got records all over the place as I typically do. But in addition to that, we've got live streams going out at 1:15 Eastern, Miami, 3 p.m. Eastern, Florida State. And then at 5:30 Eastern is Iowa. So those are our three team-specific live streams. And then at 7 Eastern, we'll be back here for the college football playoff rankings. There we go. That finally came through. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's Michael. How you doing, sir?
Michael, I'm doing well. How are you?
Not bad. Hey, I just have a couple questions for you. One is, do you think both? I mean, I haven't really seen Michigan play yet this year, but do you think they got defense to where they can maybe shut down Stroud, and maybe with Ohio State, I know they got a good to where it can come down to the running game for both teams instead of the passing game?
Well, I have no doubt that Michigan in their front seven has the caliber of players and athletes to make it difficult for Ohio State in the run game and possibly in pass protection. With Ajabo and Ross and Hutchinson and others that are not coming to mind right this second. But those three players in particular, and Colson, Junior Colson's a tremendous player. So I think that they have a shot in the run game. They have a shot at putting pressure on Stroud. And the issue that I left with another caller was that Stroud will not make a defense pay by running the ball. He will not find a lane in the pass rush to take off and take advantage and burn the pass rush and keep them honest. Where I don't have the answer for you is that Michigan has been routinely, even with some players in their secondary that have gone on to the NFL, routinely burned by Ohio State's passing game. And I don't know if they've fixed those issues, both athletically and in terms of scheme. But they do have a new defensive coordinator from the Baltimore Ravens, so that's what he's obviously working overnight, every night this week, trying to figure out.
This is another thing I was just trying to figure out too. Another thing also is trying to figure out how close. Okay, is it because Purdue loses every time they're ranked and stuff like that? Is that why I can understand with from Ohio State, but is there some reason why you didn't have them in there for your top 25 this week?
Well, I certainly considered them, but I just let's see. So Purdue 7-4. I'm trying to think how many teams I had in that were 7-4. I had Penn State, Arkansas, Mississippi State. 3 of those come to mind. I think those might be the only 3 that were 7-4 teams. I just weigh the wins and the losses.
Okay.
That's all I can say.
So I'm not totally disagreeing with you, but so you're saying their wins weighed more than what Purdue did with the 2 top-ranked 5 wins this year against Michigan State and Iowa?
So Purdue beat Michigan State and Iowa, but it's the entire resume. So
And do you still got Minnesota in your top 25?
no.
Okay, I wasn't sure and stuff like that. I know that was a close game, but then they got smoked between with Wisconsin and Ohio State. I figured that was going to happen and stuff, but I figured you might have weighed the wins more since they was 2 top 5 teams at the time when Purdue beat them and stuff.
I had those teams under consideration, and I had them just outside the 25.
Mm-hmm. Now, has Purdue, I don't know, because I haven't been able to pick it up, but has Purdue's strength of schedule gotten better as the season progressed, or has it actually gone downhill compared to what it was at the start of the season?
Has what gone downhill?
Their strength of schedule.
Whose strength of schedule? Purdue's?
Purdue's, yes.
Well, I would think that the Oregon State win is a decent win. They've held pretty steady. They've got a chance to win the Pac-12 North Division this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a game that's come through, and obviously Notre Dame continues to win. So that's a loss. That's a respectable loss. No, I would think, if anything, that their strength of schedule has generally improved. Obviously, their conference schedule has pretty much played 500. You know, some of those teams win, some of them lose within the conference. But the two main out-conference opponents have played well.
I was wondering, because it seemed like that, because I know Purdue had a tough schedule and stuff like that. And so is it going to be practically like maybe where Ohio State picks their number on Saturday against Michigan, and the same with Purdue, and also with Wisconsin and Minnesota? Do you think they'll name their scores?
Do you think I think of Ohio State and Wisconsin will be able to name their scores?
Yes, and with Purdue, as far as like, okay, this is because I mean, it could be a blowout. I could be wrong about it, but just trying to figure out with Wisconsin winning like what 7 or 8 in a row, and Minnesota kind of and the game was being at Camp Randall. Do you think they'll pick their score?
Well, the game's in Minnesota, correct?
Or name their score? Do what?
Aren't they playing in Minnesota?
Is it in Minnesota? I thought it was in Wisconsin.
Oh, you might be right.
But anyway, because I didn't know it was as good as they're playing lately. I didn't know they had a chance to maybe name their own score. And I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think it's going to be I think it's going to be a game between Michigan and Ohio State, but I wouldn't be shocked if Ohio State blew them out of the water either.
No, they're in Minnesota. That's what I thought.
Okay. All right. So they're in Minnesota. But I know if they was going to be able to name their scores, or do you think that all 3 of them will be good games this weekend?
I think Wisconsin and Minnesota is going to be a good game. I think Purdue is I don't know where the game is. I don't remember. I had it down here somewhere, but I would think that
it's at Rust State.
Yeah, I think Purdue is going to win that game. Oh my goodness, I think they're going to win that game. I'll give Indiana a little bit of fight with Tom Allen in a rivalry game, but still, that game's going to be something like 38-14.
Okay, and what about the game in Ann Arbor?
Well, like I said the other times that I've been asked, Ohio State, if both teams play an A game, then Ohio State's going to win the game. But Michigan's certainly capable of winning the game.
Okay. No, I was just wondering stuff like I'm thinking maybe 28-24.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. No, I was just wondering stuff. What thing I'm trying to figure out is, are you taking calls tomorrow during the live stream?
Yes, sir. I am. We'll be here at 7:00 Eastern. We'll watch the rankings, and then as soon as the rankings are unveiled, we'll take calls.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, Mark. Have a great night.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
2 more. Let's knock them out here at the Voice of College Football. And again, we've got Miami, Florida State, Iowa live streams tomorrow, and our call-in show with you during the College Football Playoff Watch Party. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hello, it's me, Roberto.
Hey, Roberto. What's going on?
Well, I thought like I was going to be the last caller, so thank goodness it's the second to last because I
Well,
was about to say to you that
there's at least
George.
2 after you. I would hope.
Yeah.
I feel blessed that people are calling, but I need them to stop calling.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, it's me, and then after me, it's George. So the game. I think Ryan Day is going to have his best game plan today. Or not today, sorry, for the game, because he's gonna do anything to stop Michigan's run game and put them out of schedule. And our secondary is good at staying stride for stride and man to man. Even in Kerry Coombs' time, like our secondary was stride for stride against even Oregon's receivers. And Michigan has to do a lot of like on their play calling to get the receivers open and gain the yardage needed to move the chains. And even so, like Ryan, he's going to play an angry Ryan Day team that wants to put this game out of misery. That's why I think this game's going to go.
All right. So that's your take on the game. Anything else, Roberto?
Well, maybe they're probably gonna use C.J. Stroud's leg to avoid getting into too much trouble on the drop back passes against the 2 defensive ends, or just run a lot of screens and end arounds like we did to embarrass Purdue's All-American team. It's either going to be the game's either going to be over by a third quarter, or it's going to end very quickly because the offense ain't going to stop. And I think the defense ain't going to make too much mistakes. The only one that's going to make mistakes is number 17 on our end, or sometimes if you have a good slot receiver, number 12 is the only one that's going to make mistakes on that team. Is that going to be those mistakes going to be enough for whatever the offense is going to pull? I don't think so. And what do you think about the other game that I'm thinking about, Bedlam? You think Mike Gundy's going to have enough, going to have what it takes to beat Oklahoma?
Well, I think that his team's playing better than Oklahoma. I think that they've got the best defense in the conference and one of the best defenses in the country. And as long as Spencer Sanders can pull it together and play generally the way he's played the last few weeks and not the way he's played most of his career, that Oklahoma State, as long as they're not psyched out by Oklahoma, as you know, they lose just about every year. Gundy's he's like 2-13 against Oklahoma. This particular Oklahoma State team is better than Oklahoma. So they should win the game.
Yeah, they should. I mean, Oklahoma's one loss to Baylor. Like it wasn't. It didn't. The score would look close, but watching that game, especially when I was eating out with my mom in the Mexican restaurant, it wasn't close. Like Baylor completely dominated the line of scrimmage, running the ball. Like surprisingly, they were getting like some big holes, or like getting to the second level downfield and getting some big runs with both their quarterback and their running back. Like I don't know what's going on with Oklahoma's defense. Mostly the offense. Their offense sometimes just either looks very good or they struggle, but the defense still, for some reason, has some holes. And I think with the running game, I think Oklahoma State can exploit it for the win at Stillwater's. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think Oklahoma is certainly capable. They played really good defense last week in particular. But yeah, Oklahoma's offense, for some reason, Caleb Williams looked like the answer, but he's not been. And I warned a lot of people that were anointing him as just a Heisman winner after one half a play against Texas that he's a very talented player, tremendous runner. but he's making bad decisions right now. And their offense is just, they have to run the ball against Oklahoma State to be successful. They have to run the ball, period, with Kennedy Brooks in particular and Eric Gray to be successful against any decent team. And I don't know that they can run the ball consistently against Oklahoma State.
Yeah, and they have to definitely key on Caleb Williams because, man, the scariest thing on is fourth down and like short, and Caleb Williams just breaks a couple of tackles for touchdowns. That's probably the one big key for Oklahoma State to win that game.
All right, Roberto.
I think that's it for me.
I appreciate it.
George. All right, thank you and good night.
Good night. Have a good one. Two more. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
I wanted to be last, Mark. It's George.
Well, I am
Can
too
you put
kind
the
of
other
soul.
guy on?
I am too kind of soul to make it last because
All
I asked
right.
for 2 more phone calls, and as I typically do, I'm taking like 5 or 6.
I'm just saying you could put me on hold and talk to him because you still have 168 people in the chat. Nobody's going anywhere.
Well, that's very nice of people. I appreciate that, but it is 2 a.m, and I've got to get up early.
Damn, it's only 11 in Oregon. You
Yes.
should move out here. Your shows could last way later into the night.
Oh, that would solve my problems. No, I don't mind
Yeah,
doing a
I know
show
it
until
doesn't
2
work.
o'clock in the morning. You know that. I'll stay up till all hours, but yeah.
Hey, Mark, this
Yes.
is funny. When you started your show, you had like maybe 16 people in the chat.
Yeah.
And I went over to Uncle Lou's channel. He was doing his call show with Pete, like he does every day, at this time.
Yep.
Or, whatever day he does it. I don't know. My phone gives me notices. Anyway, I said, hey, when this show gets over, come on over to Mark's channel. I said, there's no rush, just when the show's over. And I said, Lou, you and Pete come too. But they didn't show up. But everyone else came, I think.
Well, yes, George. Thank you for alerting everyone. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
We're building the community.
We are building the community. That's right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Let's say you're the head coach at Alabama or Ohio State, right?
Yep.
And you're playing Georgia, right?
Yeah.
How do you game plan for that?
Oh boy.
Huh? What do you tell your quarterback? Listen, boy, you better run like hell. And you make sure you throw that ball pinpoint accuracy 50 yards downfield. It's our only chance. What do you tell him? Run,
He's going
run,
to get killed.
get out of there.
He's going to get killed if he's going to wait for pass patterns to develop 50 yards downfield. Get the ball out of his hands in a hurry. That's what you're going to do.
The thing about Mullen, they always said Mullen finds the mismatches. He's a genius finding them mismatches. How do you do that against Georgia? What mismatch? Where?
Yeah, they don't exist. Yeah.
Well, people like to think maybe Ohio State can beat them or maybe Alabama, but that is a damn good defense.
Yeah, it's
possible they could
long time.
They could possibly pull at LSU this year, just go undefeated. Wouldn't that be something?
I think that's what everybody thinks is going to happen, and I'm not arguing it right now. They were my number 1 preseason team, so they're.
Yeah, I've always made jokes about them, but in all honesty, man, if they don't win it all this year, I really am going to feel sorry for them. I mean, what do you need to win a national title? And that's been good enough with JT as a backup or whatever. That's all you need. And their other quarterbacks could suffice in a pinch. I've seen them all play. They're not terrible, none of them.
Well, I'm going to say that for as good as they've been, they are going to play after this weekend the 3 best teams that they've seen all season. So they're going to have to play the 3 best teams, of course, Alabama, and then the 2 playoff games to get there.
All right.
Yep.
And they really haven't played anybody yet because it was a down year in the SEC East.
Yeah, thanks to your boy Dan.
We ruined their, what do you call that? the difficulty scale rating of their season. We ruined it.
The strength of schedule.
We messed them up bad. Okay. Who would you hire as Florida's coach if you were the AD?
I would hire.
We're opening a brand new $250 million football facility. It's heaven. You got it's got to be one of the top 5 jobs in the country. How come we can't get anybody we want? All we got to do is give them $8-9 million a year and $20 million buyout.
I'll go top 10.
What do you get?
And I'll say I would order. Let's see. I would offer jobs to Matt Campbell, Luke Fickell, or those two would be at the top of my board. We're hearing that Billy Napier, the Louisiana coach, is in the running.
It doesn't inspire me. None of those names inspire me.
Yeah.
Lane Kiffin inspires me. John Gruden, if Bob Stoops wants to come out of retirement.
Yeah.
Irvin Meyer, somebody. Who's the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs? I keep hearing someone talk about him.
Eric Bieniemy.
Yeah, I don't know. I hope we don't mess up, man. This could ruin my life. I'm 61. I don't have time to fool around here, man. I need a national title in the next 10 years.
Well, it can happen.
Imagine how Georgia fans feel.
Well, they're feeling
There's
pretty
people
good right
in
now.
their 80s. There's people in their 80s that are going, dear God, please, just one more time. So for that reason, I kind of hope they win. We can afford to pay a coach $8 or $9 million, offer a $20 million buyout. We're rich. You know that, right? Florida.
That's what I hear.
Every time Alabama wins the national title, we all get a shitload of money, like $750,000 for Alabama winning. We all share it, you know. They split it up 10 ways or something.
All right, George.
Today, Mark.
Yes.
No, wait. Today I
last
turn on
thing.
my TV. One last thing. The first thing I see when I turn on my TV today is they're showing 500,000 pounds of packaged up, ready to sell. They're like 20-pound bags of marijuana. 500,000 pounds. And then they go, that's worth $500 million a year, right? So if you ever want to get in a little side business with me, I think I know what to do. Grow marijuana. It's legal in Oregon. They were growing it to sell it in Alabama. You don't have to do that. You can just sell it here where it's legal, or Colorado, or those other 10 states.
George.
You should probably get me a warehouse or some property. I'll grow weed for you all day, man.
George, it's 2 a.m.
Pretty good.
Consider how much I care at this point.
All right. That was for the fans in the chat.
Right.
They don't want to talk about football.
All right. Have a good one.
Hey, he asked me, G-Dog Forever said, ask him if he remembers the Zach Dumas hit. Do you remember that?
Who? The Zach Dumas hit?
Zach Dumas.
Yes, the 1989 Hall of Fame Bowl. Of course, I remember it.
And that's why you're the voice of college football.
The Auburn, Ohio State Hall of Fame Bowl, 89. Yep, 31-14. Yes, I remember it. All right, sir. We appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for bringing the crowd with you.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. All right. I said one more call. There's 2 people on the line. These are going to be like 30-second rapid fire. Here we go. Welcome to the Voice of College Football. Who's on the line?
Hey, I hope I can live up to those last calls. But real quick, as a Notre Dame fan, I have a question for you.
Yes.
What's better for the program? For Notre Dame to be number 4 and play Georgia in the playoffs and lose. I'm not saying they're going to lose big, but lose. Georgia's, it's their year. Or to not get in the playoffs, get in New Year's 6 and get a win. What's better for the program? And I'll hang up so I can hear your answer. Thanks.
Thank you for the call. Appreciate that. And that is a difficult call. So the win is typically better, of course. And let's say that they're facing a non-group of 5 in the New Year's 6. So I think that would be key, that they face Michigan, or they don't want to face Wake Forest. They don't want to face Cincinnati in the group of 5. in the New Year's Six. So it needs to be somebody that is well established and is going to gain them some respect. Oklahoma, Michigan, Alabama, of course, in a New Year's Six game would be phenomenal. Now, if they can also make it close against Georgia, if Notre Dame stays within a score of Georgia in a 1-4 game, and then Georgia annihilates the team that they play in the national championship game, that's your formula right there. Even though it's a loss in a national semifinal game, they lose 30-27, then Georgia hammers the 2-3 winner. But otherwise, you wouldn't beat a blue blood in a New Year's Six game. No Wake Forest, Cincinnati, Oregon, no Oklahoma, Michigan, Alabama, somebody like that. Last up tonight here at the Voice of College Football, who's on the line?
Hey, Mark.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Will
Who is
Notre
this?
Dame make the playoff?
Who am I talking
If
to first?
Alabama-
I always like to know who I'm talking to.
Will?
Hey, Will. How's it going?
Pretty good. I'll make it quick for you. I know you're tired. Will Notre Dame make the playoff if the Big 12 teams split, like Oregon State wins and then they lose to Baylor, and Alabama loses by 3 scores in the SEC championship game? Do you think the committee will be more likely to put them in or not?
Well, you will make it in over the 2-loss conference champions. So forget about them. They're gone. Oregon's gone, of course. Okay, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 are out of the way. The ACC's out of the way. The comparison's going to be the Alabama 2-loss team against you. But if they lose by 3 scores, you should be in the playoff.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
I appreciate it, Will. Have a good night.
Thanks for taking my call. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks for waiting. Appreciate that. And yes, I do appreciate everybody that calls. And I feel bad at the end of the line when we've got, I can only see when there are 3 people on the line. Or let me rephrase that. I can only see that there are 3 people on the line. There could be 42 people on the line waiting. I can only see 3 at a time. And when I take a call, I can only see 2 on hold. So there could be a zillion and I just don't know it. And that's why I say I'd like to take 2 more calls or 3 more calls, but then they just keep populating and I try to get everyone to stop calling. But believe me, even when I'm asking you to please stop calling, I'm appreciative that we've got a show here where we get plenty of calls. So thank you for calling. Always understand that even when I'm trying to get through the last few and I'm a bit tired, that and I would really like to get something to eat actually before I go to bed, that I do appreciate everybody calling. You know, there are call-in shows all over the place where people can't get calls. So this is a good problem to have. So thank all of you. And believe me, when I make that our mantra on the videos, when I say best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football, that's because of you. I was sitting here 6, 7, 8 years ago with 100 subscribers. So 31,000 subscribers is not where we want to land because we need a lot more than that. We would like to get the YouTube, and I will put this and place this in honor of everybody out there. If we get the YouTube gives some kind of a plaque when you hit 100,000 subscribers, we'll place that prominently here on the set somewhere, and hopefully we'll have a nicer looking set at that point. But that will be in honor of all of you because I haven't really done anything different. I just still talk college football with all of you. You guys have made it happen and helped us to grow the channel. So thank you for making this all happen. We will be here again at 1:15 on the Miami channel tomorrow. Tuesday, 1:15 Eastern, Miami channel, 3 p.m. Eastern, Florida State channel, 5:30 Eastern. That will be on the Iowa channel, but also right here on the main channel. And then at 7 o'clock Eastern time, we'll all watch the unveiling of the latest rankings, and then we'll take your calls. Kyle's back in here. Thank you so much for that. He's got a playoff system fix. Number 1, expansion necessary. Okay. Number 2, get rid of the College Football Playoff Committee and replace with CPUs running algorithms constantly. 3, tell the people to deal with it and make bowl games meaningful again. All right. A lot to address there, but that's why we've got the off season. We will answer all those problems and more during the off season. So again, appreciate everybody being here. When you shop Amazon, please use the link that we provide in the description section of all the videos. And again, understand that I appreciate all of your contributions here. It's phenomenal that we can continue to do this and grow it and build it each and every day with your help. See you Tuesday. Today's Tuesday. Right now is Tuesday. So later today, 1:15 Eastern, Miami Live, 3 p.m. Florida State, 5:30 Iowa, then back here for the watch party at 7.